Dr. Fred Craddock is on everybody's very short list of outstanding preachers of our time. Some years ago, Newsweek magazine called him one of America's top preachers, but we all here already knew that. Dr. Craddock is Minister Emeritus at Cherry Log Christian Church, Disciples of Christ in Cherry Log, Georgia. He is the Bandy Distinguished Professor of Preaching and New Testament Emeritus in the Candler School of Theology at Emory University. He has delivered numerous lectures in seminaries and spoken at conferences such as the Festival of Homiletics numerous times, written books and articles that have been so helpful to preachers. His CDs are available through craddocksermons.com, and he is currently the director of the Craddock Center in Cherry Log, Georgia, and you can find out more about that at craddockcenter.org. Dr. Craddock, we're delighted to speak to you today. Thank you for granting this interview for the Festival of Homiletics in Minneapolis, and we're delighted to know that you're planning to be at next year's festival in Atlanta. Looking forward to that.
Right.
The act of preaching has essentially not changed for millennia. Is the sermon still a relevant communications method today?
Well, I think so. I think nothing has actually replaced the human voice. A human voice in a room of ears and voices that might speak back is a vulnerability and a dynamic and a power that's still unmatched. I don't know of any substitute for it. If you have as many as two people, they're both vulnerable. They're enough different that they need to talk, but they're close enough together that they can talk. And in a context of worship and tradition and continuity, it's irreplaceable. There's no PowerPoint, no technology that can do quite that.
You've noted over the years that traditional preaching tends to be deductive, and you advocate a more inductive process. How would you distinguish those two approaches, and why is inductive better?
Well, the deductive, as I was taught it by the old Broadus Witherspoon textbook that everybody used, you start with an assumption that the word you speak is authoritative. So you start with a conclusion, and then you draw lessons from that conclusion. Now, where you got that conclusion may rest in your own authority, the authority of the church, the authority of Scripture, or just in the minds of the people who listen who think you're an authority. But you start with a conclusion and then draw lessons from that. That's deductive. Inductive, you start with the particulars of a situation or a text and arrive at a conclusion. It asks more of the listener. The listener has to make the journey through the sermon and come to a conclusion. Now, induction is not 100% persuasive. It's the method of science. You examine 500,000 white mice, and they all have pink eyes. You still can't say all white mice have pink eyes. But you can draw a conclusion that is solid enough to live with and to live by. But I'm concerned about more responsibility on the part of the listener. A preacher, a pastor has to stay with the congregation long enough for them to develop the muscle and the nerve, the audacity to speak back, to respond, to go to little settings of conversation about the sermon, but in the sermon itself, to be able to complete sentences, to complete ideas, to make analogies, to be reminded of something you already know. That takes an activity that most congregations haven't yet really gotten into. Therefore, they say, well, now what was it you really were saying, if they're curious, or they may want a copy of the sermon. But I think over a period of time, when they see you genuinely do want them to be partners in the process, they will do it and enjoy it and feel liberated by it, and, by the way, begin to witness themselves as to what they've seen and heard. Instead of just being listeners, and if somebody has a question, call the minister, they are in a position to engage other people. When I began teaching preaching in the 60s, that was the age of the student revolution, And several things marked that 60s. One is all traditions and voices of authority have got to go. Take the pulpit and the pews out of the chapels and the sanctuaries. There's a short attention span. The human sensorium has changed. It once was for the ear, now it's for the eye. It's a visual age. The sermon, no more. But the short attention span has not really been proven to be true. If something is important and touches my life in an important way, I'll sit there a long time.